Good evening. Welcome to Bold Like a Leopard. I was expecting to do a Testigo Venezuela video today. Did not go as planned because of technical difficulties and because we had to hammer out some details. Haven't been able to get the live stream to work. Maybe able to do it sometime this week or on the weekend. Um, this topic that I'm doing right now is kind of unexpected, and it might reveal a little about me and some of my political and social evolution. Um, I do live in Northeast Ohio, and we have a sports team called the Cleveland Indians, and we have a mascot for this team called Chief Wahoo. And growing up, I did follow the team for certain periods. I've never been probably the team that I've most, as you probably know, the team that I've most been committed to is the Dallas Cowboys. I've always been much more interested in the Cowboys than any other team in the country. And with baseball, I've always loved the sport, but you know, I think the Cubs have generally been the team that I've followed the most. The Indians in the past too, the Mets as well. I still have this. I found my dad found this recently. This Mike Piazza bobblehead and whatever. And I've always loved baseball just because of you know the 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 individualism of it. Each position is important individually. There's performance and statistics and whatever. And what went unnoticed for so long was this issue with the mascot, Chief Wahoo of the Cleveland Indians. For me, growing up, it was basically you saw it everywhere, and there had been political undertones for decades with it that kind of were below the radar for me because I didn't really care. I was just watching the team perform. There were many seasons. I remember when during the late '90s, this was a baseball town because the football team had moved away. I'd never been like a proud Clevelander. I've never really. I've always thought of this town as kind of like, you know, when people move here, I'm like, your first Clevelander when you've survived an encounter with like a drunk driver or something. That's really been my perspective of it. And there's all these Cleveland jokes or something. The mistake on the lake stuff. It's so cliched now. It was cliched back in the '90s too, but the team. And I'm still not like a huge proud Clevelander, although people here do work pretty hard. And you know the issue with the Indians mascot. I think, believe it or not, that might be the only issue where I've had leanings that are more towards the social justice warriors than they are towards my other libertarian beliefs. I do think that, and I still do, regardless of the story coming up, which I don't find any joy in. Um, I still think that Chief Wahoo needs to be retired and that the mascot has to change. I think that American Indian mascots, yeah, people like them and they have a lot of affection towards them. But if you look at the underlying messages within them, they are derogatory and they are defamatory. There's sometimes when people say that they are honoring the Native Americans. If you really look at it, I don't think that's true. The difference between me and a lot of the SJWs, though, is that I don't think that by shaming people and calling them, racists for wearing a baseball mascot, you're going to change their mind. So that's the attitude that I've taken towards it. Now, how did I come to have this viewpoint? You know, for like I said, for many years I didn't care at all because I just cared about the baseball team. Then one year, I heard about the protest going down at the stadium. I decided, I'm going to go and take a camcorder. I had one of those digital camcorders I took down to opening day, and I'm talking to these protesters, And you know, I was talking to one of them, and I was saying, you know what? I think you guys are kind of exaggerating because people, I mean, they may have racist undertones to what their to their jersey and their mascot, but I don't think they're really racist towards you. I don't think they really care. And just as I was saying that to him, to one of these Indian activists, one of these drunken fans walked up to him and said, "You're not a fucking Indian. You're a fake." This guy was, believe me, I'll show his. Do I have his face here? Um, no, I could have picked a story with his face. So hold on. Um, anyway, this guy, if you want to see a picture of him, here, I think I got one coming up. Uh, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, this guy was being accosted by somebody who really there's no way you can be in any doubt that this is an American Indian. It's this guy over here, and this was the person I was talking to when that happened. And he's sorry, I don't know if you guys can see that. One second. Here we go. You guys can definitely see it now. This man in the windbreaker, Robert Roca. I was talking to him, and it was it was a surreal situation for me, and he didn't have to talk to me. There were plenty of people there. I guess there were people that were generally avoiding him, but there were press people there. He didn't have to be talking to me. Just like a lot of my other, like I have guests on this channel, they have no obligation to talk to me. How many people do they really reach? Um, I mean, you could probably surmise that it's very little, very few people. And Robert Roca was just indicted, just like the story says. Anti-Chief Wahoo activist charged with misusing federal grant money meant for Native Americans. So I'll read through the story and then I'll give my personal, because this really is a personal take on it, and because I've met this guy, I'll give my own impression on it and why I think it's really something I'm not happy about. It says a well-known anti-Chief Wahoo activist was indicted in federal court Wednesday and charged with stealing more than $77,000 in grant money meant to benefit Native Americans in Northeast Ohio. Robert Roca faces charges of conspiracy and 2 counts of theft of government funds. His indictment comes after a multi-year investigation by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The U.S. Attorney's Office says Roca, a Cleveland-based resident, worked with consultant Craig McGuire to steal money from the Parma-based American Indian Education Center. Roca is an executive director of the nonprofit, which was established in 1995. Roca obtained, that's how he pronounces it, by the way, not Roche, which is the typical way people pronounce it. I spoke to him personally. I think he pronounces it Roca. So he obtained a grant in 2011 through the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The Circle of Care grant was supposed to support mental health and wellness programs for Native American children and families, according to the indictment. SAMHSA awarded Roca's nonprofit more than $302,340 for fiscal year 2012, and blah blah blah. There's all these numbers here. What he received. One second. I gotta catch my breath here. Prosecutors said Roca paid himself by classifying himself as a project coordinator of the programs funded by the grant, even though the grant's regulations precluded him from doing so. The grant applications also identified another person as the project coordinator, according to the indictment. So, there's all this stuff here, and Mr. Roca took tens of thousands of dollars earmarked for Native American children and families and put the money in his own pockets, U.S. Attorney Justin Herdman said in a news release. Reached by cell phone on Wednesday afternoon, Roca referred questions to his attorney, Larry Zuckerman. Zuckerman said he would discuss the case after Roca is arraigned. Roca has been a vocal advocate for the need for more resources for Native Americans. He has also been a well-known face in the movement to rid Cleveland of Chief Wahoo, the controversial mascot of the Indians. McGuire of Lewis Center pleaded guilty of the federal charges in April. Prosecutors said Rocha paid McGuire with grant money, which is prohibited by federal rules. He has agreed to cooperate with the government's investigation and to testify at trial if asked. If he does what he is asked, he could face a sentence of between 8 and 14 months in federal prison. So, um, that is basically the story as far as the local press. Do I believe it? I really don't know, to be honest with you. I can't say yes or no because honestly, my personal impression after meeting Rocco was that this is a guy with very good calm demeanor. He's typically able to um, face these protests. Like he's a protester, and usually when he goes and protests at opening day, they're vastly outnumbered, and people make a deliberate point either of ignoring him or just provoking him and yelling slurs at him and the other people there. So yeah, I think he's over the years. I think he developed like a very well put together game face when going to these protests, and it didn't seem like a very lucrative position because people. I mean, this American Indian Education Center was never that well funded for years and years. Obviously, if you read the article, there's a lot of sums of money that are changing hands there in recent years. I don't know how much of it actually got dispersed to the people in question, but I think that I'm going to wait to reserve judgment or not because it's easy for me to say when it's somebody I don't know that they're guilty, but this is somebody I met, and to be honest with you, I was very impressed. I think he was a very um, good speaker, a one-on-one speaker. I'm not saying like in front of crowds, but certainly this wasn't somebody who was an idiot who would go out like you see in protests today and just spout out about patriarchy or about the male stare or toxic masculinity. This was a guy who knew how to make his case, and he was very persuasive. And we did have a back and forth. And by the way, he has another guy who works with him, Sundance. Also, I mean, not as eloquent, but a very, gracious person. These are not protesters like you see almost everywhere else that they make a huge ruckus and then they throw shit at cops. They were more. I think they were in it for the long game. Let me put it that way. That they wanted the people that were passing by to pay attention to their cause and possibly have their minds changed. And I think that unfortunately they failed at it um, for a variety of reasons. And that's where I get to my own opinion on the Chief Wahoo mascot, which, like I said, I think it's not a good thing. I think that it is racist. If you really look at it, I mean, I don't think that it's a question. I don't fault people for wearing what they want to wear because I'm a free speech absolutist. And I think that inevitably, if you ban something, that's why I don't think that it should be banned. I think it should be replaced. I think the team should voluntarily replace it. I think they should, if they really wanted to go the extra mile, they would have to change the Indians mascot entirely. They have to change the name. And we have a progressive paper here in town called the Cleveland Scene that's always campaigning for that, for changing the mascot, which I think that the way that the liberals go about it, as opposed to the way that um, you have the actual American Indians go about it, is one of the reasons why it's been a failure. Um, I'm just looking at the comment screen if there's anybody. I know people have been tuning in and out, so I'm sorry if you tuned in and you don't have Testigo Venezuela tonight, but the issue with Chief Wahoo is that you are literally taking a cartoon version of a race of people and putting him on a ball cap. And there's a number of elements, such as the fact that Indians were beheaded during the Indian Wars. So I'm not trying to say that we should erase history and that people can't wear what they want. Like the with the Confederate flag and everything. I think that inevitably people are going to do what they want to do. They don't care about hurting other people's feelings, because in the end they live according to their own truth and their own vision of what they prefer to wear. Sorry guys, I'm just like really worn out today, but I thought I'd at least comment on this while it's a fresh story. I saw it on the Golden State Times, by the way, that they talked about it. It was only video site that was talking about it. Um, so getting on with it, I did read a little material about Indian mascots, and I do think that Indian mascots are a problem in terms of image, but what you should know, though, is that it's not the most important problem in the Native community. They have some of the worst healthcare crises in the country. I think they have the worst unemployment rate of any ethnic group, bar none, Native Americans. So, American Indians. I don't really care about the nomenclature or whatever. I think that the symbolism is a problem, but it shouldn't be the only problem. People have to recognize that yes, it is racist to put a cartoon picture of a race of people on a ball cap. But the worst problem is the neglect that is happening to these reservations. People have a misconception that Indian reservations are rich because of casinos. Well, a lot of those casinos, guess who's gambling there? It's the actual reservation residents, the Indians themselves. It's not as lucrative as you think, and you know you kind of have to take an objective look at this. Don't look at it from the perspective of whether you're a liberal or a conservative or a libertarian or you're anti-racist or you are racist. You have to look at it as people who have been thrust into reality where they're wards of the state. Indian reservations are federal trust land. It essentially means that the government doesn't trust the Indians to own their own property, so they have them living there as basically dorm residents or something. I think that that's a major problem. It's a much bigger problem than these Indian mascots. Um, and like I said, I do think that the Indian mascots are a problem. I'm a huge Dallas Cowboys fan. Our big rival is the Washington Redskins. The Washington Redskins, I think, is a racist team. They have a legacy of racism that's going back since the founding of the team. George Preston Marshall, who was the founder of the team, was a very, very staunch racist and segregationist, hated blacks, was one of the most bigoted owners in the NFL, didn't want black people in the NFL. And I don't support that. Um, I hate the team anyway. I think that growing up, I remember this was still the era, until I was probably 12 years old. You could turn on daytime TV; they would show old westerns and whatever. So you would grow up and between that and the NFL and other representations. Yeah, I looked at the Indians. The Indians as kind of the enemy because I was a Dallas Cowboys fan. It's a stupid thought because but that's the way kids think, and I do think it is a problem. But this guy, Robert Roca, you know, he's been indicted. He may have stolen a lot of money from his own charity. I don't know if he did it or not, and I'd really be I hope that he didn't. He seemed like a very good and well and deep thinking person. He didn't seem like an idiot. That's what I'm trying to say. And for this to be true would be for me just uh, kind of I would see it as a real betrayal of people's of their innocence because I think that I gave him a fair hearing when I listened to him. I think people should have given him a fair hearing. I think the people that ignored him should have stopped and taken a moment to at least hear his point of view. I mean, but they're on their way to a baseball game. They don't need to hear about politics. That's their viewpoint. Um, it's their choice. But this politicization of sports has been, to, in my opinion, that it's been a huge source of damage for his cause, because now that everything has to do with racial or gender identities in sports and in politics and everywhere else, I think legitimate and credible causes like his, they get lost in the shuffle. American Indians, there are a lot of them that are against these mascots. There's a lot of them that are actually for the mascots, but because everything is about identity, this was it would be fine if the people that were fighting for their own causes were the only ones that were given the podium to speak about them, or they were given the main amount of attention. But the reality of the situation is that often you have these jackasses that are on sports media that they try to speak for them. They're basically caping for them. They're virtue signaling. That what some people call white splaining. That's what the SJWs claim that it is. There's this Max Kellerman, this retard on ESPN, can't shut the fuck up about politics. You joined ESPN. You didn't join C-SPAN. Try to remember what you're doing here. And I don't give a fuck what the politics are at the moment. If you want to talk politics and sports, then there has to be a politics and sports channel. You can't just take the most important sports channel there is and make it all about politics. Now, that has damaged the cause of groups like Robert Roca's, in that people, because of Kaepernick and because of similar cases where athletes kind of jump the shark in terms of their political expressions, their political self-expression, they go a little too far, and they engender a huge backlash of free speech on the other side. There's people who say, "Fuck your gesture, I'm against it." It's the same thing with these Indian mascots. Some of these protests, the majority of these protesters that I encountered were very civil people. But there are people that do act out. I wouldn't say that with the Cleveland Indians protesters that they do that, but with when they were protesting the Washington Redskins, I think that they were being a little overly aggressive. They were doing the full court press all the time, trying to get on TV, and people got alienated from the cause. And I'm not trying to criticize them for what they believe. I'm just saying that strategically, I think it was a major misfire for the Native American movements. And in my opinion, as long as you're protesting and making your point, I think there's going to be a substantial number of people that will listen and give you a fair hearing. If you're being obnoxious and hogging the spotlight, like Bob Costas did when he spoke out about it, it does some damage for it. I think Bob Costas is the wrong person to speak about, because he's just he's a corporate shill. And if you have people that their whole time in the spotlight is spent trying to look like a deep thinker when it comes to sports, then that's a bad decision. And like I said, this was somebody that I met. I had a fair amount of respect for him, and if he's convicted or if he pleads guilty, which it could happen, it's going to be. I'm not going to take any joy out of it. I think that it would be, in my opinion, this real sign that activism has completely fallen apart. There's the real activists are sometimes people that they do it out of sense of provocation. The Paul Joseph Watsons, and they're trying to restore their. That's why I admire a lot of these activists who consider themselves to be of the right. I think on the left there aren't that many people that are principled enough to actually take a take one on their chin for their beliefs. And I thought that this Robert Roca was one of these people, but if it turns out that he did commit these crimes, I think this is a major betrayal on his part of the people that trusted in him, and I hope he's innocent. And I'll be looking into the trial, seeing what I can get out of it. And for those of you left there tonight, yeah, I think we kind of have to take a step back sometimes and remember that these causes, if we let them envelop our lives, then at some point we have to use them to sustain our lives, and that could be what happened here. And I'm not going to prejudge him, because again, this is somebody I know, so I expect more of him. And if he turns out to be innocent, I would actually be pretty happy. So let me know what your thoughts are. Try to read a little about the story. I did post a link. And have a great night. This is Bold Like a Leopard. And Jap's not going to give up on